The world as they knew it was gone, burned to ash, drowned in silence, and choked beneath the weight of death. Dead America stretched out like a scarred wasteland, its cities crumbled, and its roads swallowed by wild brush. What remained were skeletons of civilization and shadows of a past humanity that had fought, lost, and now barely clung to life. In the twilight haze of a shattered town called Harper's Hollow, a single flickering light pulsed weakly from an abandoned radio tower. It was the kind of signal that survivors had long thought lost forever, an echo from a time when hope was still alive. Isaac crouched low behind a toppled fire truck, his breath shallow, heart pounding like a warning drum. His ragged clothes hung from his lean frame, stained with dust and blood. In his hands, he cradled a cracked walkie-talkie, the only link to the outside world. The night was thick with menace. Somewhere beyond the broken windows and hollow shells of homes, the undead stirred. Their guttural moans and the scraping of decayed limbs against concrete whispered a grim lullaby. Isaac's group was small, 5 souls, each bearing their own scars from years of fighting the relentless tide of death. They had heard rumors, stories whispered by wandering survivors of a new safe zone rising somewhere in the north, a place where the living were building a future on the ruins of the old world. But those were just stories. Until tonight. Isaac's radio crackled suddenly, breaking the eerie silence. His fingers trembled as he pressed the button. "This is Isaac, Harper's Hollow. Anyone out there? Please respond." Static. Then, a voice. Faint, desperate, and unmistakably human. "Harper's Hollow. This is Ellis. You're not alone." Isaac's heart clenched. Ellis was a name he'd heard before, a leader in a neighboring enclave who had vanished months ago. The signal was unstable, fragmented by distance and interference, but it was a lifeline. "We're pinned down near the old schoolhouse," Isaac whispered, glancing over his shoulder. The rest of the group, huddled behind crates, exchanged nervous looks. "Zombies are closing in. We can't hold much longer." The radio crackled again. "Hold on. Reinforcements coming. Coordinates inbound." Isaac almost smiled. Reinforcements, words that once sounded like a cruel joke in this dead world. But tonight, hope flickered brighter than any fire they'd seen in months. Suddenly, a distant crash shattered the fragile calm. Grotesque figures emerged from the shadows, rotting bodies shambling forward, eyes glazed with hunger. The undead. Isaac cursed under his breath, signaling his group. "Positions. Don't let them get close." The fight was brutal and chaotic. Isaac raised his makeshift spear, thrusting with desperate precision. Around him, bullets cracked, echoing through the empty streets. The survivors fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves, every strike a defiance against the encroaching darkness. But the undead were relentless. For every one they felled, 2 more seemed to take its place. The smell of decay hung heavy, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. In the midst of the chaos, Isaac caught sight of a girl no older than 12, trapped behind a collapsed wall, screaming for help. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, dodging snapping jaws and grasping hands. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her free, feeling the weight of a fragile new life in his arms. "Stay close," he urged, his voice tight. "We're getting out of here." The group retreated toward the radio tower, their only hope to send the coordinates Ellis promised. The undead pursued, their unyielding groans pressing in on all sides. Reaching the tower, Isaac scrambled up the rusted stairs, heart hammering. The radio room was dark, filled with broken equipment and scattered papers, a graveyard of forgotten transmissions. Isaac fumbled with the controls, his fingers slick with sweat. He keyed the microphone again. "Ellis, this is Harper's Hollow. Coordinates uploaded. We're trapped at the tower. Need immediate extraction." Static buzzed in response, then a voice, stronger this time, "Hold tight. Help is on the way. Keep your eyes open." Isaac's hope surged even as he scanned the horizon. The undead pressed closer, shadows merging with the encroaching night. But above the ruin, a faint glow pierced the darkness, a distant light, steady and true. Something was coming. Something new. And from the ashes of dead America, maybe, just maybe, a new hope was beginning to burn. If this fits your style, I can continue writing part 2 next. Would you like me to proceed? Part 2, The Light in the Distance. The glow on the horizon grew stronger, a pulsing beacon cutting through the night like a promise. Isaac's heart refused to slow, every nerve alive with anticipation and dread. The undead pressed closer, their ragged breaths and guttural moans echoing in the chilling air, but the faint light was a sign, perhaps the first sign of salvation they had seen in months. "Isaac, they're coming," whispered Mara, her voice trembling as she clutched the girl tightly. The child, named Lily, though none had asked, had fallen silent, eyes wide but strangely calm in the arms of her rescuer. Isaac didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the approaching glow, trying to make out shapes in the darkness beyond the ruined town. A low rumble rolled across the cracked pavement. Not the growls of the undead, but something different, something mechanical. A convoy. From the shadows, headlights flickered to life. Tires crushed shattered glass and crumbled concrete as vehicles slowly emerged, battered but intact, moving with deliberate caution. Soldiers, real soldiers, clad in scavenged gear and makeshift armor, emerged from behind steel-plated trucks. "We're saved," Mara breathed, relief washing over her like a cool tide. Isaac's group surged forward, the undead momentarily forgotten as they rushed to meet the strangers. The newcomers raised weapons, not to shoot the survivors, but to hold the undead at bay, pushing them back with gunfire and shouts. "Hold the line," a commanding voice barked through the chaos. A woman stepped forward, her face illuminated by the harsh glare of headlights. Her eyes were sharp and fierce, framed by a helmet scarred with the marks of countless battles. "I'm Captain Ellis," she said, voice steady but urgent. "We got your message. We're here to evacuate survivors and establish a safe zone." Isaac exhaled, the weight of exhaustion threatening to crush him, but Ellis's presence ignited a spark of hope deep inside. "Follow us," Ellis ordered, her squad quickly forming a protective perimeter. "We'll get you out of here." The survivors gathered their few possessions and fell in line, moving quickly with the escort. Lily clung to Mara, who kept her close, whispering soft reassurances in the child's ear. The convoy rumbled onward, leaving Harper's Hollow behind, its broken streets swallowed by darkness once more. As they traveled, Isaac's mind raced. The promise of a safe zone was a fragile thing. After everything, after all the betrayals and losses, could this really be the fresh start they'd been dreaming of? Or was it just another trap waiting to be sprung? The convoy halted in a small clearing surrounded by thick forest. Campfires flickered between hastily pitched tents, their orange flames cutting the gloom. Survivors, dozens, maybe hundreds, milled about, faces illuminated by flickering light, eyes reflecting hope and fear in equal measure. "This is Haven," Ellis announced. "The last real foothold we have. We're rebuilding, fighting back, finding ways to push the undead back, block by block." Isaac scanned the camp, noting the heavy weapons, makeshift barricades, and a sense of cautious determination. People shared stories, repaired equipment, and cared for the wounded. For a moment, the harsh reality of the dead world seemed distant. Ellis led Isaac and the group to a long table strewn with maps and radios. "We're planning our next move," she explained. "We found a cache of supplies buried beneath the old government complex in downtown Harper's Hollow. If we can get it, it could be the key to expanding Haven, more food, medicine, weapons." "But the undead there, they've grown stronger," warned a grizzled scout, rubbing a fresh scar on his cheek. "Not like before. They're organized, like they know how to defend." Isaac felt the weight of those words settle heavily. The dead weren't just mindless monsters anymore. Something was changing. Something worse. "We have to take the risk," Ellis said firmly. "Without those supplies, Haven won't last. And neither will any of us." That night, Isaac lay on a cot beneath the stars, Lily sleeping soundly beside him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to hope. But the flicker of light also cast long shadows. The undead were evolving. And if they weren't careful, that new hope could be extinguished before it even began. Suddenly, distant howls shattered the fragile calm. The undead were moving, more than anyone expected. Isaac sat up, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the camp's firelight. He wasn't sure what the night would bring, but one thing was clear: survival would demand more than courage. It would require unity, sacrifice, and the strength to fight not just for themselves, but for the spark of hope rising from the ashes. From the depths of despair, a new chapter was beginning. And the fight for Dead America was far from over. Part 3, Shadows on the Horizon. Dawn crept slowly over Haven, casting pale light on the scarred faces of its survivors. The camp was alive with cautious energy, whispers of hope mingled with the ever-present tension. Isaac moved among them, carrying Lily in his arms, watching as Captain Ellis coordinated preparations for the risky supply run. Maps were spread across rough tables, fingers tracing routes through the ruins of Harper's Hollow. The government complex lay at the heart of the city, once a symbol of authority, now a fortress overrun with the undead. The mission was clear but deadly: infiltrate, grab the supplies, and get out before the horde overwhelmed them. Ellis gathered her team, a ragtag mix of hardened fighters and new recruits. She looked to Isaac as she laid out the plan. "We'll move under cover of darkness tonight. Silence is our ally. No gunfire unless absolutely necessary." Isaac nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The lives of these people depended on their success. As the sun rose higher, Isaac found a moment alone with Mara and Lily near the camp's perimeter. The child's small hands clung to Mara's shirt, eyes wide with innocence in a world that had lost its kindness. "Mara," Isaac said quietly, "what happens if we don't make it back?" Mara looked away, swallowing hard. "We make sure we do. For Lily. For all of us." The answer was simple but heavy. Night fell again like a blanket, thick and suffocating. The team moved quietly through the shadows, hearts pounding as they slipped past decaying buildings and shattered streets. The city was deathly silent except for the distant groans and occasional shuffle of undead patrols. Approaching the government complex, a forbidding sight loomed ahead: a barricade of twisted metal and broken vehicles, patrolled by slow-moving figures. The undead were everywhere. Organized. Watching. Ellis signaled to halt, her eyes scanning the enemy. "We wait for a gap." Minutes dragged like hours. The tension was unbearable: one wrong move could mean death. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, a sharp, desperate cry. The group spun toward the sound. A young scout was trapped, surrounded by a pack of undead closing in fast. Isaac's instincts kicked in. "Cover me," he shouted, sprinting toward the scout. Bullets tore through the night, tearing into the undead, but there were too many. Isaac reached the scout just in time, pulling him away from snapping jaws. They sprinted back to the group, breath ragged. Ellis cursed under her breath. This mission just got a lot harder. Inside the complex, the survivors searched frantically for the supply cache. Boxes of medical gear, canned food, and ammunition filled the dusty storage rooms, a treasure trove of hope. But as they loaded the supplies, a distant rumble shook the building. The undead had sensed the intrusion. The barricades were no longer enough. Isaac heard the low growl of something different, a heavier footstep, closer, more deliberate. Something was coming. Through cracked windows, shadows shifted, larger, faster, and more vicious than any undead they'd faced before. Ellis barked orders. "Move! Fall back to the extraction point." The team fought their way through the collapsing cityscape, undead clawing at their heels. Isaac carried a heavy crate of medical supplies, sweat stinging his eyes. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. From the shadows, a hulking figure burst through, a grotesque abomination, faster and smarter than the rest. Its eyes burned with unnatural fire, and its snarls cut through the night air. The fight turned desperate. Isaac found himself back-to-back with Ellis, their weapons barely holding the creature at bay. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen, an evolution of the dead, a nightmare born from the ashes of humanity's fall. "We have to get out, now!" Ellis shouted. With a final burst of effort, the survivors broke through the undead line and raced toward their vehicles. The convoy roared to life, engines screaming as they fled the city, the monstrous creature lunging after them in vain. As the dust settled and the night swallowed the ruins behind them, Isaac knew one thing for certain: the dead were changing. And if the living didn't adapt fast enough, this new nightmare would consume them all. The fight for survival was far from over. From the ashes of dead America, a darker, deadlier enemy was rising. The convoy rumbled through the empty highways, the stolen supplies packed tight, but the air inside the vehicles was thick with unease. The monstrous creature that had chased them still haunted Isaac's mind, its unnatural speed and cunning a terrifying reminder that the dead were evolving. They were no longer the mindless corpses that had once shuffled aimlessly through the ruins. Something darker was taking root. At the camp in Haven, the survivors unloaded the precious supplies. Relief rippled through the group, but it was fragile. Every face bore the weight of exhaustion and fear. Captain Ellis gathered the leadership team in a battered tent, maps and radio equipment strewn across the table. "The creature we encountered, it's not alone," she said grimly. "We've had reports from other outposts. The dead are adapting. Coordinated attacks. Smarter hunting." Isaac ran a hand through his hair. "How do we fight something like that?" Ellis's gaze was hard but resolute. "We find their weakness. We learn. We survive." As the meeting dispersed, Isaac's thoughts drifted to the past, the world before the fall. He remembered his family, the life that once was. The way the sun felt warm on his skin, not a cold threat in a shattered world. But those memories were fading, like echoes in a long-abandoned building. Near the edge of camp, Mara sat beside the small fire, tending to Lily. The child had become a symbol, a fragile ember of hope that kept the survivors moving forward. Isaac joined them, settling beside the flickering flames. "We have to be ready," Mara said quietly. "If the dead are changing, we can't keep fighting like we used to." Isaac nodded. "We need a new plan. More than weapons and barricades." Suddenly, a sharp cry split the night. Scouts shouted warnings as figures stumbled into camp, survivors from a distant outpost, faces pale with fear. "The north road is blocked," one gasped. "Dead have taken over the bridges. Reinforcements can't get through." Ella stood, her jaw clenched. "Then we'll have to clear a path. Tonight." The survivors prepared quickly, checking weapons, readying vehicles. The night air was thick with tension, each heartbeat a reminder of what was at stake. Isaac loaded his rifle, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on him. The new threat wasn't just the undead, it was the crushing isolation, the desperate fight to keep humanity alive against impossible odds. As they moved into the darkness, the moon casting pale shadows over the landscape, Isaac thought of the light that had first brought them hope, the radio signal from Ellis that had saved Harper's Hollow. That light was still out there. They just had to find it before the darkness swallowed them all. The night air was thick with tension as Isaac's team crept through the skeletal remains of the old highway. The bridges ahead were twisted ruins, battered by time, neglect, and the relentless siege of the undead. Survivors from the northern outpost waited anxiously behind them, eyes wide with hope and fear. "This is it," Ellis whispered, signaling for silence. "If we don't clear these bridges, no one gets through. No reinforcements, no supplies. Haven falls." Isaac's grip tightened around his rifle as they approached the first bridge. The wooden planks groaned beneath their weight, the metal supports corroded and fragile. It felt like walking on a knife's edge, but turning back wasn't an option. Suddenly, a faint shuffling echoed from below. Shadows twisted and writhed in the river mist, undead figures, lurking beneath the bridge, waiting. The team froze. Isaac motioned for the others to spread out, careful not to trigger an ambush. Every breath was loud in the silence. Ellis raised a finger and pointed toward a narrow gap in the enemy's patrol. "Move fast. Take them quietly." One by one, the survivors slipped across, knives and silenced weapons dispatching the lurking dead. But as Isaac stepped onto the middle of the bridge, the wood creaked loudly. A dozen heads turned in unison toward the noise, eyes glowing with hunger. "Run!" Ellis shouted. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the night as the team sprinted toward the other side. Planks snapped underfoot, splintering into the dark waters below. Isaac's heart hammered as he pushed forward, the undead clawing at their heels. Reaching the far side, the team scrambled up a steep embankment, breathless and shaken but alive. They regrouped, realizing the bridge behind them was no longer stable. "We can't cross again," muttered a scout. "We have to find another way." Ellis's face was grim. "No time. The only route is through the abandoned train tunnels just ahead." Isaac swallowed hard. The tunnels were a known death trap, dark, claustrophobic, and rumored to be overrun with the dead. But there was no choice. As they entered the tunnels, the darkness swallowed them whole. The air was thick with moisture and decay, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence. Faint whispers echoed from the shadows, sending chills down Isaac's spine. The team tightened their formation, weapons raised, every nerve alert. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence. From the darkness, figures lunged, twisted, feral undead, faster and more brutal than any before. The fight was savage and desperate. Isaac fired until his arms trembled, reloading frantically as the team was forced backward. The tunnels echoed with the sounds of snarls, gunfire, and desperate shouts. "We have to hold the line," Ellis yelled. Slowly, the survivors pushed forward, inch by bloody inch. Isaac's vision blurred with sweat and grime, but he fought on, driven by the thought of Haven and the lives depending on them. Finally, they burst out into the cold night air on the other side of the tunnels. The bridge they needed to cross lay ahead, intact but guarded by an enormous horde of undead. Isaac's breath caught. It was a nightmare made real, a wall of death blocking their path. Ellis took a deep breath, her eyes fierce. "This is the point of no return. We break through or we die trying." The team steeled themselves for the impossible fight, knowing that whatever happened next would decide the fate of Haven, and the fragile hope rising from the ashes of dead America. The night was pitch black, with only the pale glint of moonlight cutting through the dense fog that clung to the broken bridge ahead. Isaac's pulse thundered in his ears, a steady drum of fear and adrenaline as he and the survivors gathered behind the rusted guardrails, eyes fixed on the horde that writhed below like a living river of death. Ellis crouched beside him, whispering fiercely, "This is it. We've got one chance. Timing and precision. Everyone sticks to the plan." Isaac nodded, trying to steady his breathing. The plan was simple but brutal, split into two teams. One would create a diversion with noise and fire to draw the horde's attention, while the other would sprint across the bridge, carrying the supplies and clearing a path for the rest of the convoy. The survivors exchanged grim looks. There was no room for error. A signal flare shot into the sky, piercing the darkness with a flare of red fire. The diversion team sprung into action, igniting the remains of abandoned vehicles near the bridge's edge. The horde shifted immediately, grotesque heads turning, mouths snapping open and closed in anticipation. The snarls grew louder, a horrid chorus of hunger and rage. Isaac gripped his rifle tighter and waited for Ellis's command. "Go!" With a roar, the sprinting team bolted from cover, pounding across the wooden planks. The bridge groaned ominously beneath their weight. Planks shattered behind them, but they kept moving, no time to look back. Undead figures surged toward the fire, distracted but not defeated. A few broke away, stumbling after the runners. Isaac ducked a snapping jaw, firing with sharp precision. The air filled with gunpowder and fear. Halfway across, the bridge trembled violently as a huge section near the middle began to collapse. A fallen beam crashed into the dark water below, sending up a cloud of spray. Isaac's heart stopped for a split second. If the bridge broke, they'd be trapped, or worse. But the survivors pressed on, desperate to reach the far side. On the other side, Mara and a small group worked furiously to secure the convoy's vehicles. Engines roared to life, tires spinning on gravel. The backup team was ready to evacuate the wounded and transport the vital supplies back to Haven. As Isaac reached the end of the bridge, a heavy thud behind him marked the arrival of the monstrous creature they had encountered days earlier. Its burning eyes locked onto him with a cruel intelligence. Isaac didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, firing round after round into the beast's thick hide. It roared in fury, lunging forward with terrifying speed. Ellis joined the fight, wielding a machete with deadly skill. Together, they pushed the creature back, buying time for the others to escape. The horde's snarls echoed as the diversion burned low, but the survivors were already on the move, speeding back toward Haven with the precious supplies. Breathless and battered, Isaac looked around at his companions. Their faces were streaked with dirt and blood, eyes wide with exhaustion but burning with determination. "We did it," Mara said softly, cradling Lily close. Ellis gave a grim smile. "For now. But this fight is far from over." As dawn broke over the horizon, the survivors returned to their fragile sanctuary. Haven was battered but alive, a beacon of light in a world consumed by darkness. Yet Isaac knew the future was uncertain. The dead were evolving, becoming smarter, deadlier. And somewhere out there, new horrors were rising from the ashes of the old world. But in that moment, surrounded by those who refused to give up, hope was more than just a word. It was a promise. The sun had barely risen over Haven when an uneasy quiet settled across the camp. The survivors moved like ghosts, their eyes scanning the horizon, ears tuned to every distant sound. The victory at the bridge had come at a high price, wounded men and women, supplies stretched thin, and a gnawing fear that the dead were learning faster than they could fight. Isaac sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision, but his mind raced with questions. How many more of those abominations lurked out there? How long before they came for Haven itself? A sudden crackle from the radio broke the silence. The static cleared, and a voice, distorted but clear enough to recognize, called out. "This is Outpost Delta, survivors, need help, surrounded." Isaac's heart skipped. Outpost Delta was one of the last known safe havens east of Haven, rumored to have communications equipment powerful enough to reach other survivor groups. Ellis grabbed the handset. "Where exactly are you? What's your status?" "We're pinned down in the old university district, horde closing in fast, medical supplies running low, please, anyone, help us," the voice faltered before cutting out into static again. Ellis looked up, determination hardening her features. "We have to help them. If Outpost Delta falls, the entire region could be cut off." Isaac nodded. "But it's a suicide mission." Mara stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Then we'll make it a mission to remember." Within the hour, a small team was assembled. Isaac, Mara, Ellis, and a handful of fighters prepared for the treacherous journey into the heart of the university district, a twisted maze of crumbling buildings and narrow alleys, perfect hunting grounds for the undead. The streets were eerily silent as they moved out, shadows stretching long in the early morning light. Every step was cautious, every noise a possible threat. As they approached the university's massive stone gates, a chilling sight awaited them, barricades torn down, flames licking the sky, and distant groans growing louder by the second. "We're too late," one scout whispered, fear coloring his voice. But Ellis wasn't ready to give up. "No. We fight. We push forward." Inside, the team found survivors huddled in the library's basement, faces pale, eyes haunted. They were few, but desperate and determined. "We're here to get you out," Mara said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Medical supplies were quickly distributed, wounds tended to as best as they could. But time was running out. The horde pressed in relentlessly, pounding on the barricades, snarling with increasing fury. Isaac could feel the tension snapping like a wire stretched too tight. Every second was borrowed time. "We'll make a run for the extraction point," Ellis ordered. "Cover each other. Move fast." The survivors linked arms, weapons ready, hearts pounding. When the barricades finally gave way, a flood of undead surged into the library. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the corridors as the group fought desperately toward the exit. Bodies fell, but they pressed on, driven by a flicker of hope in the darkness. Emerging into the open air, the survivors sprinted toward waiting vehicles, engines roaring like thunder. Isaac glanced back once, catching sight of a monstrous figure emerging from the shadows, one of the evolved dead, eyes burning with unholy light. But this time, the survivors were ready. A hail of bullets brought the creature down, its snarls fading into the night. As the convoy sped back toward Haven, the survivors looked ahead to an uncertain future, their bonds forged in the fires of battle. From the ashes of dead America, a new hope was not just emerging, it was fighting to survive. Back at Haven, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. The survivors moved with a fragile hope, patching wounds and tending to the weary. But beneath the surface of relief, unease rippled like a dark current. Isaac stood at the edge of the camp, staring into the dense tree line beyond. Something wasn't right. The woods seemed to hold their breath, the silence too complete. "Did you hear that?" Mara's voice cut through the quiet, her eyes sharp as she joined him. Isaac nodded slowly. "It's like the forest is watching us." Ellis approached, her face grim. "We've had reports of movement, shadows slipping through the trees, faster than any normal dead." A chill ran down Isaac's spine. The dead weren't just evolving, they were learning to hunt differently. That night, the camp's guards doubled their patrols. Every snap of a twig or distant howl set nerves on edge. The survivors huddled close, weapons ready, every eye scanning the darkness. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A scream pierced the night, echoing through the camp. Isaac and Mara raced toward the source, hearts pounding. Near the perimeter, a survivor lay clutching a bleeding arm, eyes wide with terror. They came from the trees, shadows, they moved like ghosts. Ellis gathered the team. "We're facing something new. We can't fight blind." Isaac volunteered for a reconnaissance mission, moving with Mara through the dense underbrush, guided only by moonlight and instinct. The forest was alive with whispers, rustling leaves, soft footsteps just beyond sight. Suddenly, figures emerged, fast, silent, and terrifyingly coordinated. Isaac fired, but the creatures vanished into the darkness like smoke. The battle was unlike any they had faced, an unseen enemy striking from the shadows. Retreating the camp, Isaac's mind raced. They needed more than brute force. They needed to understand this new threat. The survivors began studying the forest, setting traps and listening posts, learning the rhythms of the whispering shadows. Hope burned still, but the night had grown darker. And the fight for dead America was far from over. The tension in Haven had reached a breaking point. Days bled into nights filled with restless sleep and strained nerves. The whispering shadows in the forest had become a constant threat, relentless, unpredictable, and deadly. Isaac stood on the outskirts of camp, staring into the darkness where countless eyes watched and waited. The survivors' morale was fraying. Supplies were running low again, and the wounds from past battles had barely healed. Every day was a fight against hunger, exhaustion, and the encroaching dead. Ellis paced with grim determination. "We can't hold out forever. We need to strike back before they overwhelm us." Mara nodded. "But how do you fight an enemy you can't see? An enemy that moves through shadows?" Isaac's gaze hardened. "We find their weakness. And we hit them where it hurts." That night, the team prepared for a dangerous raid deep into the forest to find the source of the whispering shadows. Armed with whatever weapons they had, Molotovs, knives, makeshift explosives, they moved silently into the dark undergrowth. The trees seemed to close in around them, the air thick with anticipation. Every rustle was a warning, every shadow a possible enemy. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a blood-curdling scream. From the shadows, creatures lunged, faster, more coordinated than ever before. The team fought desperately, fire and bullets cutting through the night, but the creatures seemed to anticipate their every move. Isaac realized the horrifying truth: these were not mindless dead. They were evolving, adapting to the survivors' tactics. Each encounter taught them, made them smarter, deadlier. When the last ember of their makeshift torches died, the survivors were forced to retreat, bruised but alive. The forest seemed to close behind them, swallowing their presence once more. Back in camp, Ellis gathered the weary survivors. We can't run forever. This is our home now. We fight, or we die. Isaac looked around at the faces lit by firelight, tired but unbroken. From the ashes of dead America, a new hope still flickered. But the darkness was closing in faster than ever before. Let me know when you want me to continue with Part 10, the finale. Part 10, Rising from the Ashes. The dawn broke over Haven with a fragile light, casting long shadows across the battered camp. The survivors moved quietly, hearts heavy but resolute. The battle against the whispering shadows and the ever-evolving dead had pushed them to the brink, but surrender was not in their nature. Isaac stood before the gathered group, the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like a mantle forged in fire. We've been tested, he said, voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into every face. The dead are changing. They are smarter, faster, more dangerous. But so are we. Mara stepped forward, eyes blazing with fierce determination. Tonight, we strike back. Not just to survive, but to take back what's ours. Plans had been made in whispered conversations and hurried meetings. Every survivor had a role. Engineers rigged traps and explosives along the forest's edge. Scouts scouted for the heart of the shadowed horde. Fighters sharpened blades and loaded rifles. As darkness fell, the survivors moved into position. The forest was alive with tension, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand tall. A distant howl pierced the night, the signal. From the shadows, the whispering dead emerged, a terrifying wave of snarling, agile creatures. The survivors held their ground, lighting the traps one by one. Explosions shattered the silence, fire illuminating the night sky like a grim beacon of resistance. Isaac fought with every ounce of strength, his rifle barking as he covered Mara and Ellis, who worked to ignite the final line of defense. The battle was brutal and relentless. For every creature that fell, two more seemed to take its place. But the survivors' resolve never wavered. When the last explosion rocked the forest, silence fell. Breathing hard, Isaac scanned the scorched landscape. The whispering shadows were gone, for now. Mara approached, bloodied but smiling. We've won a reprieve. Isaac nodded. From the ashes of dead America, we're building something new. Not just survival. Hope. The survivors returned to Haven, battered but unbroken, their bonds forged in fire and shadow. The fight would continue, but they had proven one thing above all: even in the darkest times, humanity's spirit could not be extinguished. And in the ruins of a dead world, a new hope was rising, unexpected, fragile, but unstoppable. If you want, I can help create prompts or visual descriptions for this story too.